On the day I thought I'd found happiness, I lay in a hospital bed abandoned by my husband, while he spent millions on jewelry for another woman. After years of sacrifice, marrying him in a ritual when he was half dead, nursing him back to life, building his empire from nothing, he told me coldly I had schemed to steal his true love's place. I died in a fire with him, only to open my eyes once again. But this time I won't waste my life on Nathaniel Hayes. The bells in the old Carter household rang loud and sharp that morning, echoing through the air like some grim warning. The Hayes family had arrived at our door, their black sedan rolling to a stop outside our gate, polished and spotless even in the dusty countryside. My heart skipped a beat when I saw Mr. Hayes step out, his expression grave, his eyes heavy as though the weight of the entire world rested on his shoulders. I didn't need to ask why he had come. Word had already spread like wildfire through the town. Nathaniel Hayes, the pride of the Hayes family, had been in a terrible accident. His car had spun out on the slick road outside the city, flipping 3 times before coming to a halt in a twisted heap of metal. He had been pulled out barely alive, unconscious, bones fractured, head bandaged. The doctors said he might never wake up again. And now here was his father standing at our gate searching for a miracle in human form. "Amelia," my mother whispered sharply, her hand brushing my arm as though she could hide me behind her skirts. "Don't look at him. Don't even breathe. This has nothing to do with us." But she was wrong. It had everything to do with me. Because ever since I was a teenager, my heart had belonged to Nathaniel Hayes. I remember the first time I saw him clearly, even now. I was 16, standing under the magnolia tree at school with a pile of books clutched against my chest, when he had walked by with his easy stride and that faint, careless smile that could light up an entire street. He had been kind to me once, just once, helping me pick up my books when I dropped them on the sidewalk. That fleeting moment had been enough to brand him into my heart forever. But Nathaniel had never seen me the same way. To him I was always Amelia Carter, the quiet girl from a working-class family. My love was a secret, tucked away where no one could mock me for it. And Nathaniel? He only had eyes for Clara Bennett. Beautiful, dazzling Clara. The daughter of the wealthy Bennett family. She was everything I wasn't. Charming, elegant, untouchable. Everyone had known they were destined to be together. The town gossips had been saying it for years. The Hayes heir and the Bennett princess. What a perfect match. But fate had been cruel. Clara had refused to marry Nathaniel now that he was lying in a coma. She had wept, yes, even fainted dramatically in front of the Hayes family, but in the end her answer was firm. I would rather die than marry him in that state. And so the Hayes family had come to me. "Please, Amelia," Mr. Hayes said now, his voice heavy with grief but lined with calculation. "You know the ritual. If someone marries Nathaniel, it might draw away the misfortune. He could recover. You're a kind girl. You can save him." My mother snapped instantly. "Save him? He's not a drowning puppy, he's a man in a coma. Don't you dare try to throw my daughter's life away just because your precious Clara refused. You'll not trick Amelia into being your caretaker for the rest of her life." But I wasn't listening to my mother. My eyes had drifted to the car, to the faint shadow visible through the window. Nathaniel. Bandage pale still. My heart clenched painfully. I thought of all those years of silent love. Of all the nights I'd whispered his name into my pillow, knowing it would never be returned. Of how I had watched from afar as he smiled at Clara, the world at his feet. And suddenly the decision felt inevitable. "I'll do it." The words left my mouth before I even realized I'd spoken. Both my mother and Mr. Hayes turned to stare at me. My mother's face went deathly white. "Amelia." But I stood straighter, clutching the hem of my skirt to keep my hands from trembling. "I'll marry Nathaniel Hayes." The wedding was held that very evening. There were no flowers, no laughter, no music. Just a hastily arranged ceremony in the Hayes family's garden. I was dressed in a borrowed gown, pale ivory lace that didn't quite fit, cinched at the waist with pins. My veil was thin, a piece of gauze that blurred my vision as I walked down the aisle. Nathaniel lay in a wheelchair, slumped and unmoving, his face wrapped in bandages, his chest rising and falling slowly. His once strong frame was frail, and if it weren't for the faint beeping of the machine they had set up beside him, one might have mistaken him for dead. My heart ached, but I kept walking. Each step felt heavier than the last. This was not the wedding I had dreamed of as a little girl, twirling in my room with a pillowcase as my veil. There was no joy, no glowing groom waiting with outstretched arms. Only me and the man I loved, broken and unconscious. I, Amelia Carter, take Nathaniel Hayes as my husband. My voice quivered as I recited the vows, but I forced myself through every word. My hands were cold as ice as I placed the ring on his limp finger. And just like that, I became Mrs. Hayes. The days that followed blurred into each other. I moved into the Hayes Villa, a sprawling mansion that now felt more like a hospital ward. Nurses came and went, but the burden of caring for Nathaniel fell to me. I fed him spoonfuls of broth when he could swallow. I bathed him, cleaned his wounds, massaged his limbs so they wouldn't stiffen. Sometimes, late at night, I would sit by his bed holding his hand against my cheek. "Please wake up," I whispered into the silence. "Please, come back to me." I managed everything. Household accounts, meals, even smoothing things over with creditors as the Hayes family business began to waver under the weight of hospital bills. I did it all without complaint because I loved him. And slowly he began to stir. It was months later when his fingers twitched for the first time. I had been adjusting his blanket, humming softly to myself, when I felt the faintest movement. I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. "Nathaniel," I whispered, clutching his hand. His eyelids fluttered. For a moment I thought I saw his dark eyes beneath the lashes. Tears filled my own eyes as I pressed his hand to my lips. "You're coming back to me," I breathed. "I knew you would." And I devoted myself even more fiercely. Day after day, night after night, I cared for him. I endured the scorn of society, whispers that I was desperate for marrying a half-dead man. I bore the weight of his family's cold indifference, who treated me not as a wife but as a live-in nurse. But none of it mattered. Because when Nathaniel finally woke fully, when his gaze settled on me, I thought, foolishly, that love would follow. I believed that my loyalty, my sacrifices, my heart poured out for him would matter. I was wrong. At first he was polite but distant. He allowed me to feed him, to help him walk again, but his eyes always searched for someone else. Clara. When he was strong enough to sit at the dining table, I caught the flicker of disappointment on his face as he realized it was only me by his side. When he learned that Clara had refused the marriage, his lips tightened, and though he said nothing, I could feel the resentment growing like a shadow between us. So I clung to hope. I told myself that if I just worked harder, if I just stayed by him long enough, he would see me. He would realize that no one else loved him the way I did. And so I continued. Managing his business contacts, answering his calls, ensuring his meals were ready, his clothes pressed. I smiled even when he never smiled back. I kissed his forehead when he slept, even though he never reached for me in return. I loved him with everything I had. But Nathaniel Hayes never loved me back. I used to believe that love was patient, that if you gave enough of yourself, one day it would come back to you. That belief kept me alive in those early years of my marriage. By the time Nathaniel's strength returned, the Hayes family business was faltering. His father had lost interest in managing it, his mother was too frail, and it fell on Nathaniel's shoulders to restore the family's legacy. And I, his wife in all but name though never in his heart, was the one who shouldered everything behind the scenes. I kept the house running when creditors came banging at our gates. I ironed his suits for board meetings, polished his shoes until they gleamed. I stayed up into the night preparing reports, cross-checking contracts, sometimes even forging his signature to keep things moving while he was still weak. And slowly the tide turned. By the time Nathaniel was 30, the Hayes business was booming again. He was sharp, decisive, ruthless in negotiations. Investors admired him. The town praised him. Strangers looked at him and saw a rising star, a man destined for greatness. But at home, when the doors shut and the lights dimmed, there was only silence between us. He rarely looked at me. Rarely spoke more than a sentence. And though we shared the same bed, his body was always turned away, his dreams reserved for a woman who wasn't me. So I told myself, this is enough. I was by his side. I was his wife. Even if his heart never turned my way, perhaps my loyalty could be its own kind of love story. But years of exhaustion have a way of breaking even the strongest body. I remember the first time I collapsed. I was scrubbing the kitchen floor. It sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? A woman who managed contracts worth millions, down on her knees with a rag and a bucket of soapy water. But the maid had quit that morning, tired of the long hours, and I hadn't wanted Nathaniel to come home to a dirty house. The tiles blurred in front of me. My hands trembled. Then the rag slipped from my grasp, and the next thing I knew, my brother was shouting and everything went dark. When I opened my eyes, I was in a hospital bed. The doctor's voice was grave. "Mrs. Hayes, your body has been overworked for too long. Stress, malnutrition, lack of rest. It's taken a heavy toll. You need to stay hospitalized and undergo proper treatment." Hospitalized. Proper treatment. Words that sounded like salvation, but all I could think of was the expense. We had money now. Nathaniel's business was thriving. Surely this time I wouldn't have to count pennies or pray over bills. I was wrong. 2 days later, I was signing discharge papers with shaking hands. The nurse gave me a look of pity. "Mrs. Hayes, leaving this early isn't wise. Your condition." "I can't afford to stay," I whispered. And it was true. The hospital bills were mounting. Nathaniel hadn't spared me a glance, much less a credit card. When I begged his secretary for help, she shook her head apologetically. "Mr. Hayes said the company funds are tight right now. He can't approve anything unnecessary." Unnecessary. That was what my life was to him. I returned home pale and weak, my body hollowed out from fatigue. I curled up in bed, my chest aching, my lungs rattling. All I wanted was a word of comfort, a hand to hold. But Nathaniel was nowhere to be found. When he finally came home, it wasn't with medicine or flowers. It was with a velvet box in his hand. He tossed it onto the dresser. The lid sprang open, revealing a necklace glittering with diamonds so large they could blind. I stared at it, dumbfounded. What is this?" "An anniversary gift," he said flatly, loosening his tie. My heart lurched with foolish hope. "For me." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and his eyes were cold enough to freeze rivers. "No. For Clara." I couldn't breathe. "Clara. She deserves it," he said calmly, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. "She waited for me all those years. If you hadn't taken advantage of the situation and married me, I could have married her back then. She wouldn't have wasted half her life waiting." I sat there frozen, the room spinning around me. "Waited?" My voice cracked. "She refused you. She said she'd rather die than marry you while you were in a coma." His lips twisted into something cruel. "And you swooped in, didn't you? Don't think I don't see through you, Amelia. You've always wanted this. Marrying into the Hayes family. You schemed your way into my life when I couldn't even say no." The words cut deeper than any knife. Manipulative. Calculating. He truly believed that was who I was. The years of devotion, the nights I sat by his bed praying for him to wake, the sacrifices I made to keep his life from falling apart. It had all been twisted in his mind into something ugly. My voice trembled, but I forced the words out. "I loved you." He didn't flinch. Didn't soften. "I would have preferred never waking up at all," he said coldly, "than being shackled to a woman I don't love." For a moment I couldn't even feel the floor beneath my feet. The air left my lungs and my vision tunneled. That night I packed my things. Not much. A few clothes, a photograph of my parents, the necklace my brother had given me when I turned 18. I left the house in silence, my body shaking with fever, my soul already numb. I went home to the Carter household, where my mother wept at the sight of me, and my brother cursed Nathaniel's name until his voice broke. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I simply lay down in my childhood bed, ready to let the sickness consume me. But death didn't wait for my consent. It came instead in the form of fire. I woke to the acrid scent of smoke, the roar of flames devouring wood and cloth. The villa, I don't know how it began, perhaps a faulty wire, perhaps sheer cruel fate, but Nathaniel and I were trapped inside. I remember the heat searing my skin, the coughing fits that racked my chest as I stumbled down the hall. Nathaniel's voice shouted somewhere in the distance, furious even in the face of death. "Amelia, this is your fault." My fault. Even as the world burned, it was still my fault. I collapsed on the floor, the flames closing in. And in those final moments I thought of all the years wasted, all the love poured into a man who never wanted it. The fire consumed us both. And then silence. No pain. No heat. Only darkness. Until I opened my eyes again. And found myself standing at the altar, dressed in ivory lace, facing the same unconscious man I had once married. The world had spun backward. I had been reborn. The sharp clanging of voices was the first thing that pierced through the haze. I jolted awake, my chest heaving, expecting to find smoke filling my lungs, the fire devouring everything around me, Nathaniel's furious voice accusing me even in our final moments. But there was no fire. No heat. Only sunlight filtering through thin curtains and the murmur of people outside. For a disorienting moment I thought I must be dreaming. Then I looked down. My hands were unscarred, smooth, young. Not the hands that had scrubbed kitchens raw. Not the hands that had been marked by years of labor and sickness. My heart thudded in disbelief. I stumbled to the mirror across the room. A girl stared back at me. A girl in her early 20s, pale-cheeked, with eyes far too bright to belong to the broken woman who had died in a burning villa. It was me. But me from years ago. No, I whispered, clutching the edge of the table to steady myself. My reflection trembled with me. This can't be real. And yet the sounds outside made it all too real. The Hayes family. I knew this moment. I had lived it once already. Nathaniel Hayes lay in a coma after his accident. His family, desperate to cleanse the bad luck, had gone to the Bennett household first to beg Clara to marry him. And Clara, dramatic as ever, had wailed and shouted that she would rather die than marry a half-dead man. Now, in their desperation, they had turned to me. My chest tightened. I had said yes then. I had walked into that marriage willingly, heart full of love, believing devotion would be enough. I had given him everything. My youth, my health, my soul. And in the end I had been repaid with hatred, betrayal, and death. Not this time. I wiped the tears from my eyes and straightened my shoulders. This time I would not throw myself into the fire. The voices grew louder as I stepped outside. The Hayes family stood in the Bennett courtyard, their fine clothes stiff with pride but their faces drawn with desperation. Clara was there too, draped in a silk shawl, her lips curled in disdain. "I told you already," she snapped at Mr. Hayes. "Don't come to me with this again. I'm not sacrificing myself for your useless son." My heart twisted, not because I cared for Clara's cruelty, but because I knew Nathaniel would always love her no matter what venom she spat. Mr. Hayes turned then, his gaze sweeping the yard until it landed on me. His eyes lit up. "Amelia," he said, relief washing over his features. "You're here. You're a kind-hearted girl. Nathaniel's unconscious, but if someone marries him, the ritual could save his life. Please, you can save him." The same words he had spoken in my past life. And I, foolish girl that I was, had said yes. I looked at him now, at the hope in his eyes, the weight of expectation. For a moment the ache of my old love stirred, the image of Nathaniel lying pale and broken in that wheelchair. But then I remembered his voice. I would have preferred never waking up at all than being shackled to a woman I don't love. I drew a long, steady breath. "Mr. Hayes, I can't." The courtyard went silent. Clara's lips parted in surprise, then curved into a mocking smile. My mother gasped beside me. Mr. Hayes's face fell into shock, then anger. "Amelia, think carefully. This isn't just about you. It's about Nathaniel's life. You're refusing to save him." I lifted my chin. My voice was steady this time. "I saved him once before. I gave him everything. And all it brought me was misery." Of course they didn't understand. How could they? Only I knew the truth of the years ahead. Only I knew the depth of his contempt. Before Mr. Hayes could argue further, a sudden voice rang out from the courtyard gate. Hoarse, panicked, filled with urgency. "Stop." My head whipped around. And there he was. Nathaniel Hayes. He was staggering forward, sweat dripping from his brow, his leg bound in a brace, his head still wrapped in gauze. He looked pale, weak, but his eyes, those dark eyes, were blazing with fear. My breath caught in my throat. He was awake. Awake when he shouldn't have been. That's when it struck me. He had been reborn too. His father rushed toward him in shock. "Nathaniel, you're awake." But Nathaniel ignored him. His gaze was fixed on me, sharp as a blade, filled with panic. "Summer." He stopped himself, correcting the name in this life. "Amelia. Don't even think about it." The courtyard froze. Every eye turned toward us. My heart hammered painfully. Nathaniel limped closer, gritting his teeth against the pain, every step a struggle. But still he forced himself forward until he stood directly before me. His hands clenched at his sides, trembling with fury. "The woman I love is Clara Bennett," he said, voice hard and unyielding. "I will never marry you." The words struck like lightning. I had waited years to hear something, anything, from his lips that acknowledged me. And now, in this second life, the first words he spoke to me were a rejection. Not just rejection. A declaration that he would never love me, never choose me. The courtyard erupted into whispers. Clara preened smugly. Mr. Hayes looked stricken. My mother pulled me close, her face pale with fury. But I only stood there numb. Because in that moment I understood. Even with a second chance at life, nothing had changed. Nathaniel's hatred for me was carved too deeply. His love for Clara was just as blind, just as consuming. Me. I was nothing but a shadow in his eyes. Bitterness rose sharp in my chest. I had spent 20 years in my past life giving him everything, only to be despised. Now in this new life he was desperate enough to drag his broken body across town just to make sure it didn't happen again. I forced a small cold smile. Don't worry, Nathaniel, I said softly, but my voice carried in the silence. I don't want to marry you either. For the first time his expression faltered. And in that flicker of confusion I found the first taste of freedom. The day Clara Bennett agreed to marry Nathaniel Hayes was the day I finally realized how twisted fate could be. I stood at the edge of the courtyard, arms crossed, as the scene unfolded before me like a play I had already watched once before. Nathaniel, pale and trembling, his leg braced and head still bandaged, stood with a desperate determination that made my chest tighten, not out of pity but out of bitter familiarity. I love you, Clara, he declared, his voice rough but loud enough for the whole Bennett family to hear. Marry me. I promise I'll love you for the rest of my life. Clara arched one perfectly sculpted brow. She didn't rush into his arms. She didn't cry tears of joy. Instead she leaned back in her chair, her red lips twisting into a smirk. Marry you, she repeated. With what, Nathaniel? Love doesn't pay bills. Love doesn't feed me or clothe me. You want to marry me? Bring at least $2,000 as a bride price. Otherwise, don't bother. The demand fell like a slap across his face. Nathaniel froze, his eyes flickering with shock. In his past life, Clara had accepted him without hesitation, because he had already been the rising CEO, powerful and wealthy. But this time, stripped of the fortune he once took for granted, he was just a crippled young man with nothing to his name. Still, he straightened his shoulders stubbornly. I'll get it, he said quickly, as though trying to convince himself as much as her. His hand instinctively went to his pocket. Not even a few crumpled bills. Clara's father, Mr. Bennett, laughed harshly. You want to marry my daughter with empty hands? Ridiculous. At least have the decency to admit you can't afford her. Humiliation painted Nathaniel's face red. His gaze darted around, frantic, until it landed on me. And just like that, the bitterness I had been holding inside became icy calm. Amelia, he barked. Give me $2,000. The crowd stilled. Heads turned. I blinked at him, then let out a laugh so sharp it cut through the tension. Excuse me. You heard me, he snapped, his tone dripping with entitlement. Your family may be working class, but scraping together $2,000 shouldn't be impossible. Quit pretending you don't have it. You're just refusing because you're jealous. You want to take Clara's place again, don't you? The audacity stole my breath for a moment. He truly believed the world revolved around him, that every action of mine was somehow a scheme to entangle him. I stepped forward, my eyes locking on his. Nathaniel Hayes, are you a beggar now? You open your mouth and the first words out are demands for money? And you think this is love? The murmurs rippled instantly. Laughter followed, harsh and cutting. She's right. What kind of man proposes marriage without even $2,000 to his name? And here I thought Nathaniel Hayes was supposed to be impressive. Turns out he's just a cripple trying to play prince. Nathaniel's face burned crimson. His jaw clenched and I could see his hands trembling with suppressed rage. You think you're clever, he spat at me, voice low. But you'll regret this. I'll build my empire again, and when I do, you'll be begging to come back to me. I tilted my head and gave him a cold smile. If your true love won't marry you without a price tag, Nathaniel, then maybe what you have isn't love at all. It's a business transaction. And I don't invest in failing businesses. The laughter around us grew louder, sharper. Clara looked away in disdain, but I caught the flicker of disgust in her eyes as well. Disgust not at me but at him. For the first time, Nathaniel realized that Clara Bennett did not see him as a dream come true, but as a disappointment she was willing to tolerate only if properly compensated. Still, cornered and desperate, he did the unthinkable. He scribbled an IOU on a scrap of paper, hands shaking, and pressed it into Mr. Bennet's hands. "I'll repay it soon," he muttered through clenched teeth. And with that shameful bargain, Clara finally rose from her chair and draped herself across his arm, her face the picture of reluctant acceptance. As Nathaniel carried her out, his eyes flicked back to me, smug as though he had won. But I didn't miss the way Clara's grip was stiff, her smile strained, her gaze filled with disdain. He thought he was celebrating. But I knew better. He wasn't a powerful CEO anymore. He was just a broken man shackled to a woman who only valued him when he had wealth. And for the first time in 2 lifetimes, I wasn't the one carrying the burden. I turned away, the echo of laughter still ringing in the air, and walked home free. The days that followed confirmed what I already knew. Nathaniel's dream marriage was nothing but a slow descent into misery. Without my care, his injuries worsened. He dragged himself back to work before his body had healed, and the limp in his leg became permanent. Clara complained daily about money, refusing to lift a finger in the household. Nathaniel's pride kept him from asking his father for help, so he pushed himself harder, drowning in frustration. And at night, when the town whispered about his humiliation, I slept soundly for the first time in years. No longer the substitute bride. No longer the shadow of his so-called love story. I was Amelia Carter again. And I swore with every beat of my reborn heart that I would never repeat the mistake of loving Nathaniel Hayes. The morning after Clara and Nathaniel's pitiful wedding banquet, our home was quieter than usual. My brother Matthew sat at the table, his brow furrowed as he stirred his porridge with far more force than necessary. Mother glanced at me every few minutes, her lips pursed in worry, as though expecting me to burst into tears at any moment. "Summer." Matthew stopped himself, correcting my name. "Amelia. Are you really okay?" I looked up from my bowl, blinking at him. "Why wouldn't I be?" He slammed his spoon down. "Because you loved that bastard for years. Everyone knew it. And now he's married Clara Bennett and acted like you were some shameless fool in front of the whole town. How can you just sit there and eat like nothing happened?" His anger was fierce, protective. In another life I might have cried at his words. I might have broken apart in this very kitchen, admitting that I still loved Nathaniel even as he despised me. But that Amelia was dead. Burned to ashes with the old villa. I smiled faintly, shaking my head. "Don't worry about me, Matt. I've let it go." Mother reached for my hand, her voice trembling. "Child, are you truly sure? Love like that, it doesn't just vanish overnight." "It wasn't love," I said softly. "Not really. It was blindness." The silence that followed was heavy, but for once, it was mine to command. I no longer owed Nathaniel my tears. The knock at the door came just as Matthew was about to argue again. He grumbled under his breath and stomped to answer it. And then his voice changed, surprised, warm. "Ethan, is that really you?" I turned in my chair, startled. There he stood. Ethan Miller. Tall, broad-shouldered, his dark hair a little longer than I remembered, his shy smile the same. In his arms he carried several boxes, and more were piled at his feet on the doorstep. My breath caught. Memories from my past life rushed back. Ethan, always kind when he visited Matthew, Ethan bringing little gifts for me. A pack of sweet biscuits, a scarf in winter, a notebook for school. Back then I had thought of him only as my brother's friend, nothing more. After my marriage he had left town for work in the capital. Later I heard he had died young, unmarried, gone too soon. And now here he was, alive again. "Amelia," he said, his voice lower than I remembered, almost hesitant. His gaze lingered on me, soft and unwavering. His cheeks flushed red. I'd like to date you. With marriage in mind." I froze. For a moment I thought I had misheard. My brother's jaw dropped, then broke into the widest grin I'd seen on his face in months. "Yes." Matthew clapped Ethan on the shoulder. "Finally you've said it out loud. Amelia, don't you dare hesitate. This guy's 100 times better than that Hayes brat." My lips parted but no sound came out. Ethan looked at me anxiously, clutching the boxes tighter. These are for you. Just small things. I don't want you to think I'm trying to buy your answer. I wanted to show I'm serious." Inside I was reeling. In my past life I had never once considered that Ethan might have loved me. It explained so much. The thoughtful gifts, the way he always lingered in conversation, the way his eyes had softened when I married Nathaniel. He had buried his feelings so deeply I had never noticed. And now, in this life, he had spoken them plainly. I didn't know how to respond. My heart still bore wounds, jagged and raw from Nathaniel's betrayal. Could I truly accept someone else? Could I risk trusting again? But when I looked into Ethan's eyes, I didn't see arrogance. I didn't see entitlement. I saw sincerity. And for the first time in a long time, my heart stirred, not with longing but with the faint, fragile warmth of hope. I found myself smiling. "Okay," I said softly. "Let's try." Dating Ethan was nothing like my years with Nathaniel. With Nathaniel, love had been servitude. My devotion was a chain I had fastened around my own neck, dragging me down day by day. But with Ethan, it was different. He was attentive in ways that startled me. He remembered the smallest details. How I preferred jasmine tea over black, how I always left the window cracked open at night for fresh air. When we walked together, he instinctively moved to the outside of the street, shielding me from passing carts and bicycles. He never flaunted grand gestures, but every little thing was thoughtful. A scarf tucked around my shoulders when the wind blew cold. My favorite snacks waiting on the table after a long day. A quiet word of encouragement when he sensed my doubts creeping back. One evening, when his factory was particularly busy, I cooked a meal and carried it to him at the gates. The smell of braised pork filled the air as I waited, my heart oddly light. But before Ethan emerged, another figure appeared. Nathaniel. He strutted toward me, his limp noticeable, his expression smug. "Amelia," he said, his chin tilted high. "Are you seriously bringing me food again? I'm married now, you know. You should really keep your distance. But since you've gone to the trouble, I'll overlook it this once. Did you make braised pork? My favorite." I stared at him, incredulous. He reached out a hand as though the lunchbox were already his. I pulled it back. "This isn't for you." His eyes narrowed. "Then who?" "Your family doesn't work here." "My boyfriend," I said evenly. Nathaniel's laugh was sharp, disbelieving. "Boyfriend? Please. Who would want you besides me? Stop playing games, Amelia. Just hand it over." Rage bubbled in my chest, but before I could respond, Ethan appeared. He walked out of the factory gates, wiping his hands on a rag, his expression brightening instantly when he saw me. "Amelia," he said warmly, his whole face softening. Nathaniel froze, shock flickering across his face. I stepped past him, smiling at Ethan as I held out the lunchbox. "Dinner. I thought you might be hungry." Ethan's eyes lit up. He took the box reverently as though I had given him a treasure. "You didn't have to, but thank you. You always know what I need." I heard Nathaniel's breath hitch behind us. For the first time, it was him standing outside the circle of warmth, watching me give my care, my devotion, my heart, to another man. And I didn't feel guilty. Not one bit. The whispers began in the market first. That was always how gossip spread fastest in our town. I was picking through a basket of apples when two women nearby lowered their voices just enough to seem secretive, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "Have you heard? Clara Bennett threw a plate at Nathaniel Hayes's head last night. Again. Didn't she do that last week too? Last week it was a vase. Poor fool, he used to be handsome and proud. Now he limps around like a cripple and his wife screams at him for being useless." They chuckled, shaking their heads. I didn't laugh. I didn't even flinch. I just picked up my apples, weighed them in my palm and walked away. Because honestly, none of it surprised me. Nathaniel's decline was inevitable. I had seen it written in his every choice. Without me, he had rushed back to work before his body had healed. Pride wouldn't allow him to rest, to admit weakness. The limp that had once been temporary was now permanent, his leg dragging slightly with every step. The doctors had warned him, but he ignored them until it was too late. Claire. Oh, Claire. She had married him reluctantly enough, barely tolerating his wounded pride and empty pockets. At first she tried to keep up the charade of love, fluttering her lashes at social gatherings, pretending she adored him. But behind closed doors the truth spilled out like poison. "You can't even walk properly, Nathaniel. What use are you? Where's the money? My friends are buying new dresses every week and you can't even give me an allowance. Why did I ever agree to this marriage? I should have waited for someone better." Their voices carried through the thin walls of the Bennett house, where they had settled after their wedding. The servants whispered about it and soon the entire town knew. Nathaniel and Clara Hayes were at war with each other every night. I should have felt satisfaction. And maybe, in a small corner of my heart, I did. But mostly, I felt nothing at all. The Nathaniel I had once loved, blindly, desperately, had already died with me in the fire of my first life. The man who limped through the streets now was a stranger. And strangers' miseries were no concern of mine. I had Ethan. And he was nothing like Nathaniel. Ethan worked long hours at the factory, but he always made time for me. He walked me home when the sun went down. He carried heavy baskets without being asked. He listened when I spoke, really listened as though every word mattered. One evening, as we strolled along the riverside, I caught him glancing at me when he thought I wasn't looking. His gaze lingered a little too long, warm and steady. "What is it?" I asked, half smiling. He flushed, looking away. "Just thinking, you deserve so much more than this small town." "Than me." I stopped in my tracks, reaching out to touch his arm. "Ethan Miller, don't you dare talk like that. You've given me more happiness in a few months than Nathaniel Hayes gave me in 20 years. His eyes widened, soft with emotion. He didn't say anything else, but his hand found mine, fingers threading together with a quiet certainty that made my heart ache, in the best way. This was love. Not the kind that demanded sacrifice until I had nothing left. Not the kind that chained me to misery under the guise of devotion. This was simple. Warm. Meanwhile, Nathaniel's life unraveled piece by piece. He tried to relaunch the family business, but without the energy and health to back it, he failed. He picked arguments with Clara daily, his voice echoing down the street. She screamed back louder, her shrill words carrying for the whole neighborhood to hear. One night I heard the shouting even from my home. "Divorce me if you hate me so much." Clara screeched. "Do you think I want to spend my life with a cripple who can't even pay the bills? You ruined my youth, Nathaniel. You owe me compensation." His reply was a roar, wordless with fury. Then silence. Then the sound of something shattering. The next morning the whispers spread like wildfire. Clara Bennett had shown up at her parents' home, her face bruised, her arm in a sling. She told anyone who would listen that Nathaniel had struck her over and over, until the neighbors intervened. Even the Bennett family was outraged now. Their once prized daughter had been reduced to a battered wife, her husband exposed as a violent, bitter man. Nathaniel's reputation plummeted overnight. Employers wanted nothing to do with him. Friends turned away. Even his own family, who had once seen him as their hope, began to distance themselves. Me. I sat in my quiet kitchen stirring soup, listening to the rumors drift in through the open window. Did I pity him? No. Because I remembered my own hospital bed, the pain in my chest as I signed my own discharge papers because Nathaniel wouldn't spare a dime for me. I remembered his voice, cold as ice. I would have preferred never waking up at all than being shackled to a woman I don't love. Now the shackles were his own. And he had forged them himself. That evening Ethan came home later than usual. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, his face tired but smiling as always. I handed him a bowl of soup and he took it gratefully, sinking into a chair. "They were talking about Hayes at the factory again," he said between spoonfuls. "Seems like he's on the brink of being fired. Can't keep up, too many arguments with his supervisors." I only nodded, sipping my own soup. Ethan hesitated. "Does it bother you? Hearing about him all the time?" I set my spoon down, looking him straight in the eye. "Ethan, I don't care what happens to Nathaniel Hayes. I truly don't. My life isn't tied to his anymore. It never will be again." Relief flickered across his face. He reached across the table, his hand covering mine. His palm was warm, calloused, steady. "Good," he said quietly. "Because I don't ever want you looking back. Only forward." I squeezed his hand. "Only forward," I echoed. And in that moment I meant it with every fiber of my being. The morning of my wedding dawned with sunlight streaming through my window, warm and golden, as though the world itself had decided to bless this day. I sat before the mirror, my hair braided and pinned with delicate flowers, my cheeks touched with blush. For the first time in 2 lifetimes, I was not dressing as a substitute bride, not walking into a loveless union. Today I was marrying the man I had chosen, the man who had chosen me. Ethan. My red dress shimmered in the light, the fabric rich and bold. Mother fussed with the hem while Matthew hovered nearby, grinning like a fool, already teasing Ethan in absentia about taking care of my sister or else. But beneath their laughter I felt something else. A quiet, steady joy that filled me from within. No fear. No dread. Just peace. When Ethan finally arrived with the procession, his eyes found me instantly. And the way he looked at me like I was the only thing in the world made my breath catch. He didn't see a burden. He didn't see a stand-in. He saw me. Just me. Amelia, he whispered when he reached me, his voice shaking with awe. You're beautiful. I laughed softly, my nerves easing. You're not so bad yourself. The drums beat, the guests clapped, and I stepped into a future that was truly mine. But across town, Nathaniel Hayes was unraveling. I didn't see it with my own eyes, but the gossip painted it clearly. Clara, fed up with his limp and his empty wallet, had sneered at him that morning. Still clinging to your pride? Amelia's getting married today. She's moving on. Why don't you stop living in your fantasy that she still cares? Her words struck him like thunder. He denied it at first, shouting that it wasn't true, that I couldn't possibly marry another man. But Clara only laughed, her voice dripping with scorn. Go see for yourself, Nathaniel. If you dare. And so he did. We were midway through the ceremony when a commotion stirred at the edge of the crowd. Heads turned. Murmurs rippled. I followed their gaze, and my heart clenched, though not with longing. Nathaniel. He was limping down the street, his face pale, his eyes wild, his clothes disheveled. The man who had once stood tall and proud now looked like a shadow of himself. And when his eyes landed on me, radiant in my wedding dress, standing in Ethan's arms, something in him shattered. No. His voice cracked as he stumbled forward. No, this can't be real. Amelia. Gasps spread through the crowd as he stormed toward us, rage and desperation twisting his features. Get away from him, he shouted, pointing a trembling finger at Ethan. Amelia, you can't marry him. You still love me, I know you do. This is just a game, isn't it? You staged this to make me jealous. The laughter from the neighbors was immediate, merciless. Is he insane? She's glowing with happiness and he thinks it's fake? Poor fool. He really believes she'd wait for him after everything. Ethan stepped in front of me, his hand firm around mine. His voice was calm but steely. Mr. Hayes, you're not welcome here. If you came to congratulate us, fine. If you came to cause trouble, don't. But Nathaniel wasn't listening. His gaze locked on me, pleading and furious all at once. Amelia, you can't do this. You're my wife. You always will be. Tell them. The crowd gasped again, scandal buzzing through the air. My brother Matthew pushed forward, his face thunderous. Your wife. Don't make me laugh. You treated her like trash and now you dare show up here. He shoved Nathaniel back. This is my sister's wedding and you won't ruin it. Still, Nathaniel clawed forward, his eyes red. Amelia. Tell me this isn't real. Tell me you still love me. Something inside me snapped then, not in pain but in finality. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the bright red booklet, holding it high so everyone could see. The marriage license gleamed in the sunlight, the official seal stamped deep, undeniable. This is real, I said coldly. Lucas is my husband now. You have no place here. His eyes widened, disbelief and horror flooding his face as he stared at the photograph inside. Me smiling softly, leaning close to Ethan, the two of us radiant with joy. No, he whispered. No, this can't be. The neighbors' laughter rose louder, harsher. Look at him, still dreaming even with proof in front of him. Lucas is tall, handsome, hardworking. What's Nathaniel compared to that? Nothing but a limping fool. Nathaniel's face twisted with humiliation. He staggered back, clutching his head as if the truth itself was unbearable. But I felt nothing but relief. The chain that had bound me to him for so long had finally broken. I turned away from him, my hand tightening in Ethan's. Let's go, husband. We shouldn't keep our guests waiting. Ethan's smile was steady, his arms strong around me as he led me forward. Behind us, Nathaniel's voice cracked one last time, raw and broken. Amelia. Don't leave me. But I didn't look back. Not this time. This time I walked into my new life without hesitation, leaving him behind in the ruins of his own making. The weeks after my wedding were some of the happiest of my life. I woke each morning to the sound of Ethan humming softly in the kitchen, already preparing breakfast before heading to work. I learned the rhythm of his footsteps, the way he always knocked on the doorframe before entering a room, even our own, as though to remind me I had choices now. Privacy, dignity, respect. For the first time, my life wasn't about survival. It wasn't about keeping up appearances or sacrificing myself to keep another person afloat. It was simply about living. Sometimes when I caught Ethan watching me with that quiet, steady smile, I had to look away before the tears came. I wasn't used to being loved so simply, so completely. But I was learning. Meanwhile, Nathaniel Hayes was crumbling. The town was merciless. Neighbors who once praised him now mocked him openly. See the great Hayes heir limping down the street like a beggar. Employers refused to hire him, not wanting the drama he carried with him like a curse. Clara's disdain grew louder by the day. "You're worthless," she sneered, tossing bills at his feet. "Do you think I'll live like this forever? You promised me wealth. You promised me the world. And all I got was a cripple with empty pockets." At first, Nathaniel clung to her, begging, promising he would rise again. But when opportunity slipped through his fingers, desperation twisted into rage. Their fights became legend in town. Screaming, shattering glass, sometimes neighbors intervening. And then one night Clara vanished. Rumors swirled. Some said she'd run away with another man. Others said she had stolen money. The truth came crashing down days later when smoke rose on the outskirts of town. The Hayes warehouse engulfed in flames. Clara had set the fire herself, burning Nathaniel's stockpile, his last hope of rebuilding. She hadn't stopped there. She'd taken what little money he had left and fled. For Nathaniel, it was the final betrayal. The murder shook the entire city. I was leaving the hospital after a routine checkup when I saw the stretcher rush past, a blood-soaked sheet covering the body. Later, whispers confirmed it. Clara Bennett stabbed dozens of times in a frenzy. And Nathaniel? He hadn't even run. He had been found at the scene, his hands still covered in blood, his face blank as stone. By the time the police dragged him away, he was muttering her name over and over as though he couldn't believe what he had done. The trial was swift. The evidence was overwhelming. Nathaniel Hayes was sentenced to death. I thought I would feel triumph, vindication, justice. But all I felt was emptiness. In another life I had burned myself to ashes for him. I had carried him through sickness, built his empire brick by brick, only to be discarded like trash. And now, watching his downfall from afar, I realized something chilling. Even in ruin, Nathaniel Hayes was still wasting my time. I wanted nothing more than to forget him entirely. But forgetting was not so simple. A letter arrived one morning, carried by a trembling messenger. I broke the seal only to find a few jagged words, written in a hand I knew too well. "Amelia, please. Come see me. One last time. Before it ends." My fingers tightened around the paper. One last time. How many times had I sat by his side, begging him to open his eyes? How many nights had I whispered, "Please wake up," into the silence, believing love could save him? And when he finally did open his eyes, what did he give me? I would have preferred never waking up at all than being shackled to a woman I don't love. That was what I got. That was the man who now wanted me to grant him a final kindness. I crumpled the letter in my fist and tossed it into the fire. The day of his execution came and went without me. I was at home, rocking my newborn son in my arms, Ethan's hand warm on my shoulder. Our child's soft breathing filled the room, small fingers curling around mine. Life. New life. That was where my world was now. Not in the cold stone walls of a prison cell. Not in the regrets of a man who had wasted 2 lifetimes on arrogance and misplaced love. I never went to see Nathaniel Hayes again. The gossip eventually died down. The market chatter moved on to other scandals, other tragedies. Nathaniel's name faded, his memory sinking into whispers of warning for reckless youth. But my life was full. Each day Ethan and I built something together. Not a business empire, not a fragile illusion of grandeur, but a family. A home. A life where love was not a weapon but a shelter. When I tucked my son into bed at night, I sometimes thought of the fire that had consumed me once before. How I had walked into the flames for a man who never wanted me. And then I would look at Ethan, his hand steady in mine, his smile warm, his love unwavering. And I knew. I had been reborn not for revenge, not for Nathaniel's downfall. But for this. For peace. For joy. For love that was finally, truly mine. The end.